Hi, this is Deena Thomson, author of Fallen Poppies, and this is Chapter 36.
Chapter 36. "I am so frightened," Joanna said, sitting in the front seat, twisting her hands in her lap. Chad looked over at her as he drove and smiled. They were finally doing it. They were going home. "Don't be, honey." He patted her lap and looked back at the road. The car was loaded down with their belongings. The two children in the back of the car were busily counting the unfortunate dead animals that the oncoming traffic had struck. Besides, Marjorie can't still be mad after all these years. My God, we were never happily married together anyway. "Do you remember my sister at all?" Joanna's eyebrows rose in amusement. "You can guarantee she is still royally peeved. Besides, it's not her I'm worried about. It's Ma and Pa and the other girls." Joanna placed her hand on Chad's lap. It was warm and familiar. After more than 7 years together, she still felt as though they were falling in love for the first time. "I left so abruptly without a word to anyone. My poor parents must have been devastated. They didn't even know about you, Chad." "They loved you before. They will love you again." He reached for her hand on his lap. "Did I ever tell you how much I love you?" "Yes." She smiled softly, placing her head on his shoulder. It had all been worth it. Loving Chad meant losing her family, but she had gained so much in return. "But I never get tired of hearing it." She beamed out the window as she watched the trees zoom by, blending into one green blurb. "I love you, Mommy and Daddy," Jenna's musical voice sang from behind them. The blonde-haired 7-year-old sat up closer so she could see her parents better, her green eyes twinkling. "Me too! Me too!" 5-year-old Charles pushed his sister out of the way, wanting to be the center of attention. His brown hair, so like his father's, was tasseled on his smooth forehead. Joanna looked at her two children, amazed. She still couldn't believe these two beauties were made from their love. "Charlie, stop it!" Jenna shoved back. "Mommy, tell him to quit pushing me." Joanna reached over the seat and put a gentle hand on her young son's arm. Charles sat back, crossing his arms angrily over his chest. "At least I have this family," Joanna replied, smiling warmly at the boy's resemblance to his father. "You will have your other family, too," Chad reassured, not taking his eyes off the road. They reached Chad's parents' house and were greeted with hugs and kisses. Alexandria and Neil Willis were ecstatic to have their son and his family home with them. They loved the children and were beside themselves with happiness, knowing that they would be able to take part in their lives as they continued to grow up. "Well, look at her!" Alex huffed in disbelief, standing in the open doorway. She placed her hands on her round hips and chuckled. Jenna, not being a shy girl, was tugging her own suitcase up the stairs of her grandparents' house. Elbowing her thin husband in the ribs, Alex said with adoration, "Neil, can you believe this little one?" "Hello, grandmother," Jenna said through strained teeth as she carried her suitcase diligently up each step. "It's me, Jenna." "I see that," Alex replied, her ample chest puffing out like a hen. She, too, was not shy, and she could see herself in her granddaughter. "Neil, have you ever seen such green eyes? Who does she look like?" "My mommy tells me I look like my Aunt Constance," Jenna said with pride as she reached the top of the steps. "She said when I was born, I had a tuft of blonde hair on my head, and so she said to Daddy, 'That is my sister's hair, and that is why my middle name is Constance, after my aunt, who I never met before, but I look like her.'" Jenna sighed and caught her breath. "My, your aunt must be beautiful," Alex laughed. She knew who Constance was, and Jenna was right. She did look like her. "I don't know if she is or not because I have never met her. Mommy moved away with Daddy, and has never seen her since. Joanna came up behind Jenna, petting her soft hair as the girl stood solemnly clutching her suitcase. All right, Motormouth, let's get inside before you talk your grandmother's ear off, Joanna said, easing Jenna on. Well, Jenna, the name is appropriate, Alex said. I, too, was named after a relative. My great-grandmother, Granny, as I called her. It would make me very happy if you and your brother called me Granny. Charles had just come up the stairs, followed by Chad. What is your real name, Granny? Jenna asked, her sea-green eyes dancing. The plump woman already adored her granddaughter. It amused her how spunky Jenna was. She reminded Alex of herself. She had never been one to keep a closed lip, either. Alexandria, she smiled. I like the name Alexandria. I'm going to name my daughter after you, Granny. Oh my, aren't you just precious? Neil, have you ever seen such a child? Alex said, clutching her chest tightly. Short and balding, Neil just smiled back at his wife. He was a quiet man, not prone to many words, but this child made him want to laugh. Alex had indeed met her match. She is a pistol, Alex, and look at our grandson. He is the spitting image of his father, Neil said while patting Charles on the head. Charles looked up at his grandfather with delight written all over his face. He liked it when people told him he looked like his dad. It made him feel like a man. A warm feeling washed over Joanna's entire body. Chad's family was so kind and inviting. She watched as they talked with the older Willises. Chad stood proudly beside his children, a hand on either shoulder. They were the apples of his eye, his prized possessions, she chuckled to herself. After all these years, she still felt like her love for Chad was just a dream. Never had she been loved so wholly and completely. And the children were such a blessing, two precious gifts she was able to give the man she loved. How Chad loved the children. It was a shame to think he had almost lost his chance at fatherhood. Joanna pushed those thoughts out of her head. Chad was not Mara Joy's husband anymore, and hadn't been for a long time. He was her husband and the father of her children. That was a fact. The image of her parents' faces invaded her consciousness. Her love for Chad had made her lose her parents, the children's grandparents. A ball formed in the back of Joanna's throat, thick as molasses. Could her parents ever forgive her? It had been so long since she devastated their lives with her actions. Could they forgive her not only for loving Chad, but also for revealing their secret about Mara Joy? She wrung her hands together nervously and averted her eyes from the people on the porch. She was wrapped in guilt. How could she have ever told Mara Joy about her parentage? It hadn't been her place to do so, and it was something she would never forgive herself for doing. As much as she knew for certain that Mara Joy was not her biological sister, she also knew she was her sister in every way that mattered. Joanna had long ago forgiven Mara Joy for how she had treated her all her life. She only wondered if Mara Joy could forgive her for taking Chad away and revealing her dark past. Her sister's final words to Joanna filled her mind, and a cold shiver ran up her spine. Deep inside her soul, Joanna knew Mara Joy wouldn't forgive her for what she had done. It had been too raw and too painful. She had wanted to hurt Mara Joy terribly, and she did. And it was too late to take it back now. The following day, dressed in a light yellow spring dress that enhanced the green of her eyes, Joanna stood on the front porch, looking sweet and elegant. "Wish me luck," she said to her husband, who stood in front of the door admiring her. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" "No, it's best that I go alone," she replied. "I don't want to add insult to injury. let me face them alone first and see if I am accepted before I bring you and the children to them?" Chad nodded, leaning over and giving Joanna a lingering kiss. "If you need me, I'm here," he said, touching her light brown hair. It was shoulder length now and set in a soft wave going away from her face. "I know," she said, touching the hand on her hair. "You always are." "You don't owe anyone for your happiness, Joanna." She nodded, holding back tears, knowing that it wasn't entirely true. She owed Mara joy. "You don't have to do this," Chad called behind her. Joanna looked over her shoulder back at the house. He stood anxiously in the open door. The children suddenly appeared behind his legs. They waved frantically at their mother and called out their goodbyes. "Yes, I do," she said firmly and blew her family a kiss. It was a short drive to Constance's house. Alexandria had informed Joanna with as much information about her family as she could. Constance was now married and lived with her husband and 2-year-old son only a few blocks from her in-laws. She pulled into the driveway, stopped the car, and took another deep gulp for courage. Would Constance understand? She exited the car and pushed her skirt flat on her legs, pressing the wrinkles out. She'd taken great care that morning in choosing her clothes and hoped she had done herself justice. Joanna called Constance on the night of their arrival. Her older sister's voice filled Constance with joy and confusion as she tightened her hand around the receiver. She couldn't help but ask why her sister had never left a forwarding address when she moved away. In between brief pauses, she told Joanna how much she missed her and that she read every single letter she had sent and desperately wanted to write back. They made plans to meet the next morning, which brought Joanna before the front door of Constance's little white house. Her heart pounded as she procrastinated. Part of her wanted to flee from the scene at once, but she had run away for the last time. She didn't want to run anymore. She held her breath and knocked firmly on the white door, her legs jumping and anxiously wanting to bolt. A small boy with light brown hair and brown eyes answered. Joanna inspected the boy briefly. Although his face was the shape of Constance's, that was it. The boy must take after his father. "Hello." Joanna bent down to face her nephew for the first time. "Is your mother home?" Suddenly, a medium-sized woman of slender build appeared behind the child. "Patrick, go and play, dear," the woman said, looking down at Joanna. Her heart stopped. Constance hadn't changed much. She was still blonde with soft curls that framed her face. Her green eyes were the same, just like Joanna's. She stretched back up, and the two stood still, staring at each other, soaking in the changes the years had placed on them. Joanna was taller and slimmer than Constance. When the boy, Patrick, went back into the house, it was plain to see that Constance was very pregnant. Despite these differences, they still looked very much alike. Sisters. "Joanna!" she cried, knocked out of her shock. She embraced a startled Joanna in her loving arms. "Connie!" Joanna hugged back, overcome with emotion. She had always missed Constance, but didn't know just how much she missed her until that moment. "It is so good to hear that name again." Constance pulled back and wiped tears away from her eyes. She admired her sister's appearance. "You look absolutely beautiful." "I didn't even recognize the woman in front of me at first." Joanna held a tissue to her red nose. "Oh, come in, come in." Constance grabbed her arm and led her into the warm living room of the cozy home. Constance hugged her again. "I have missed you so much. I don't understand why you wouldn't let me get in touch with you." Joanna pressed her lips tightly together and sat down on the light blue couch. She motioned Constance to sit beside her. Constance sat down heavily, her bulging tummy pushed forward. "I was afraid," Joanna began, her hand fluttering to her mouth, which had begun to quiver secretly behind the shield. "I was afraid to face you. You warned me not to fall in love with Chad, but I couldn't help myself. We couldn't help each other." Joanna dabbed her eyes with a hanky she took out from her purse. "I don't regret my decision to be with Chad. We are so happy with the children," Joanna replied, trying to excuse her behavior. "But you wouldn't let me write to you. Why?" Constance felt all the old hurt surface. She needed answers for those years filled with tears over Joanna's rejection of her. It was bad enough that she felt responsible for setting the plans in motion that would destroy her family. "Don't you understand? If I didn't speak to you, you could not snub me. I could handle rejection from Ma and Pa and even the other kids, but I couldn't handle it from you, Connie. If you would have nothing to do with me, I would have been lost. It was my way of protecting myself." Constance shook her head in disbelief. "Joanna, you should have known I would forgive you for anything. We have wasted years because you were mistakenly afraid. I realize that now. It's one of the reasons we came back home. We couldn't run and hide any longer from the past." Joanna placed her smooth palm on her sister's tight stomach. "I am here now. I won't run any more." Constance fixed her hand firmly on Joanna's. "Good. I need someone around here to share the important aspects of my life." Just then, the baby inside her gave a strong kick, causing their hands to jump up. "It looks like I came home just in time. This little one is going to be a handful," Joanna said in awe of the child growing inside of her sister. Constance laughed. "If the child is anything like his big brother, I will need all the help I can get." And as though hearing his mother talking about him, Patrick entered the living room. He stood shyly in front of the two women on the couch, a wet pinky finger twisting in his mouth. "He must take after his father," Joanna observed. The brown-haired child continued to stare blankly, almost dim-witted. Oh no, Joanna thought. Was the child slow? She thought of Pauline, the youngest of her sisters. Although she was always a sweet girl, she had sometimes seemed a little on the slow side. Could Constance, who was so intelligent and so smart, have a child who was more like her younger and less astute sister? Yes, he's the spitting image of George. Constance tried to stand up, but she fell back onto the sofa. Joanna leapt to her feet and assisted in lugging Constance's bulk up off the couch. "You are already here for me." Constance puffed and arched her back painfully. "I tell you, the end of pregnancy is a prison term for women. If it weren't for the outcome, I doubt any one of us would have been born." She gently took Patrick's fingers out of his mouth. "This is Auntie Joanna, Patrick. She is Mommy's sister who used to live far away." Patrick nodded. "Do you remember me talking to you about her?" She smoothed back his soft wavy hair. His head moved back and forth in acknowledgement. "Hello, Patrick." Joanna extended a cheerful hand to the boy. He accepted her offer with his own small hand. "I'll be seeing a lot of you and your mommy from now on. I have 2 children who would love to get to know their cousin. Would you like to meet them?" "Do you have a boy?" he asked in a clear, bird-like voice. Animation suddenly illuminated his eyes. Joanna instantly realized that what she had taken for slowness was, in fact, boredom. What would a 2-year-old boy find interesting in 2 women reminiscing? Patrick was not slow. Comprehension danced in his eyes and voiced itself in his clear, perfect speech. "Yes, I have a boy. His name is Charles, and he is 5 years old." Joanna felt pride rise in her voice when speaking her son's name. This was right. Her son should know her sister's child. They should play together and be friends. She had been a fool to stay away so long. "We play cars and build things with my blocks." Patrick stood twisting his wet fingers, trying not to shove them back into his mouth. "My goodness, Patrick, you are quite the talker." Joanna was flabbergasted. Her earlier diagnosis of her nephew was apparently totally without merit. The 2-year-old was a genius. "Patrick, you will meet your cousins soon, but for now, it is time for Mama and Aunt Joanna to have some adult time alone. Please play quietly in your room. I'll be in shortly with a snack." Constance scooted the small child out. "Now," she said, returning to Joanna, breathing slightly harder, "I have to make a call to our little sister." "Pauline?" Joanna stood up, frightened, her hands clenched tightly. "Yes, Pauline. She would never forgive me if I didn't call and tell her you are here. I'm not the only one who missed you all these years. She was still a child when I last saw her." Joanna felt emotions welling up again and tried in vain to fight them back. "She isn't a child anymore," Constance said, going to the phone. "I have missed so much. Your marriage, your son's birth, our sister growing up." Joanna felt overwhelmed. "How can I face her after what I've done?" Constance stood before her, the phone handle cradled back in the receiver. "You will face her. This is a happy day. You have returned to us. Stop worrying about the past. You will be around for all the rest of the children and marriages." Constance touched Joanna's shoulder strongly. "There is still so much time left for all of us to share." "Connie, you haven't changed," Joanna sniffled, conjuring up some courage. "I'm glad for that." "Wait till you see Pauline." Constance went back to the phone and began to dial. "She is quite the beauty. She outdoes us all, I'm afraid to say. She still lives at home with the folks. And, can you believe this? She dates George's brother. We really hope that works out." "How are the folks?" Joanna asked softly, the words barely leaving her mouth. She couldn't look at Constance. She focused her attention on her hands, twisting the tissue she held to bits. "They are fine," Constance replied in a far-off voice. "Do they ask about me?" Joanna held her breath. Constance hung up the phone again, wrenching her lips. She wrestled with her own thoughts. "Listen, I am not going to sugarcoat things for you. I am glad you are home, and I know Pauline will be happy. But Ma and Pa are not glad, is what you are trying to say." She fought back the physical pain she felt deep in her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to compose herself. What did she expect? "They all became very close after you told Mara Joy about her parentage." Guilt flooded Joanna. The look on Mara Joy's face that day would haunt her forever. "Even though she knows Ma and Pa aren't her biological parents, they got really close. Closer than before, if that was ever possible." Constance paused, then decided to continue. "You really knocked Mara Joy for a loop, a big loop." "I will never forgive myself for the things I said to her," Joanna said, unable to look the other woman in the face. "Well, she has never forgiven you for taking Chad from her. He was never really hers." Constance's left eyebrow rose in disagreement. "She doesn't feel the same way, I'm afraid." She paused, deciding whether or not to continue. "She's been married twice since you've been gone." Joanna's head snapped up, surprised. Maybe Mara Joy had moved on. "She is still with her third husband. He has 2 girls from a previous marriage, which is good for her since she—" Constance stopped and blushed a deep red. Joanna didn't need to be told that Mara Joy could have no children of her own. She was very much aware of that bit of information. He is very rich and much older than she is, but she seems happy, finally. That is good to hear, she piped up. I want her to be happy, Connie, even though I have always had a rivalry with Mara Joy. I still love her in my own way. I understand, Constance said knowingly. She, too, felt the same emotional ties to Mara Joy. They had been raised together, lived together, had lives that intertwined, and Constance had witnessed Mara Joy's honest pain when Joanna and Chad ran off together, pain that she had helped to create by putting the idea of stealing Chad away into Joanna's head. If she hadn't convinced her to be Chad's lover, she would never have fallen in love with him, and Constance would never have had to live with the knowledge that she had started the chain of events that followed afterward. I wish I could take back all the pain I have caused her, Joanna said, eyes downcast. But I don't regret my life with Chad. He is my world, and we have been so happy. I know he was my sister's husband, but it was in name only, Connie. It was in name only. Constance gave a quick nod, her own guilty heart torturing her. It might be true that their sister's marriage was in name only, but to her that was not the point. If Chad had left Mara Joy for someone else and not Joanna, their family wouldn't have been ripped apart, forever torn. We all have said and done things we wish we hadn't. You're not alone in your regrets over past deeds. But she is my sister, and what I did to her, I know. Constance paused, feeling the burden of responsibility overwhelming her. The reality was that no matter how much either tried to justify what happened, it would never be enough to erase the pain it had caused their entire family. Ever. Well, I better get the coffee going. We have a lot of catching up to do. Constance began rummaging through the cupboards in the kitchen, her belly getting in the way. Here, let me help you. Joanna gently pushed Constance into a chair. Now, tell me where the coffee is. Constance laughed, rubbing her swollen belly, and motioned to the top shelf. You should have heard Pauline squeal when I told her you were here. She sat back, pressing her strained spine on the padded chair cover. Finding what she had been searching for, Joanna began mechanically making the coffee. I can't wait to see her, she replied, filling the coffee pot with water from the sink. She won't be the same Pauline I last saw. Oh, she's the same old Pauline, sweet and loving in a childlike way. Constance pressed her hand to her back, grimacing. Tell me you didn't have these horrific backaches when you were expecting. I'm afraid to tell you, little sister, that I did. Twice, she said over her shoulder, smiling. Ugh, must be a family curse. We should warn Pauline. Warn Pauline about what family curse? Asked a feminine voice from the kitchen door. Both Joanna and Constance turned toward the direction of their disruption. There stood a tall, gorgeous brunette with the most outrageous golden streaks in her hair. She was lean and sleek, with startling green eyes. Her hair was pulled modestly back from her oval tanned face in a ponytail. She was dressed in a white button-up shirt that was untucked casually over her slim tan pants. She absolutely took Joanna's breath away. This little sister, who had been lost somewhere in the shuffle of their lives, was by far the rarest gem of the four girls, for she exuded beauty and elegance, grace and style. And she did all this while being totally unaware of herself. All you had to do was look into the young woman's face to see all the sweet innocence welled up inside. Pauline was rare. She was beautiful both inside and out. Pauline! My God! Joanna was speechless. Tears welled up in the young girl's large eyes. Her lips began to tremble, and she dashed headfirst into Joanna, circling her with a fierce grip of love. "We have missed you so much!" she cried wholeheartedly into her sister's shoulder. Joanna returned her embrace, overcome with the emotional outburst Pauline so openly and freely displayed. "Look at you," Joanna said, composing herself, pulling Pauline in front of her and giving her a thorough inspection. "You are a beautiful young woman." The girl blushed innocently. Joanna couldn't help but notice that this was new information for the exquisite Pauline. She smiled. The child was totally oblivious to her splendor. "Well, I'll always be your baby sister," she giggled. "Yes," Joanna said, hugging Pauline tightly to her again. She felt wholesome, and Joanna breathed deep of her scent, burying herself into her soft-smelling shoulder. "Joanna?" A deep voice from the doorway caused her to open her eyes, her heart pounding. The voice was one she had dreamed of hearing again, but thought she never would. She turned slowly, afraid her ears had deceived her. Standing beside Constance stood a graying-haired man with the most beautiful green eyes, the same green eyes she had. "Papa!" Joanna stood frozen on the spot. Pauline stepped aside, leaving Joanna alone to face their father. "Pappy!" she cried, forgetting her fears and running into her father's waiting arms. Alan hugged her tightly to his broad chest, a hoarse sob escaping from deep beneath the barrel of flesh. "Joanna!" he sobbed, clutching his daughter tightly to him. She felt unreal as he held her tighter and kissed her wet cheeks, afraid she would suddenly disappear. "I have missed you, girl." "Pappy!" Joanna cried out, her longing for him radiating like an aura, tears brimming in her eyes as she stared deeply into his watery green ones, conveying every ounce of sorrow and longing buried deep inside her since the day she left. The muscles in her face tightened as a wave of emotion swept across her body, leaving her trembling with an intense feeling of love and emptiness for the years without him. This man, who had loved her so dearly her entire life. "I have missed you so much." "How could you have stayed away from us all these years?" he asked, cradling her head in his large hands. Joanna kissed each palm and held them to her cheek. "I'm sorry, Pappy. I was afraid." Joanna turned to Constance and Pauline. Their arms were intertwined together, holding each other for emotional support. "I was afraid you all hated me for what I had done." "Hate my own daughter? My flesh and blood?" Alan turned Joanna's face up to his. "I could never hate you, no matter what you did." He brushed away the fresh tears streaming down her face. She looked up at him, swelling with pride. There was so much love in his heart. How could she not have trusted it? Are you still married?" Alan asked, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by his 3 daughters. He couldn't bring himself to say Chad's name. As much as he made Joanna happy, he had broken Mara Joy's heart. And as far as he was concerned, Chad had stolen 2 of his daughters from him and was instrumental in tearing his family apart. "Yes, Pa, I'm still married to Chad, and we have 2 beautiful children, Jenna and Charles." Joanna searched her father's eyes. She could see the struggle behind them. "Chad and I are very happy together, Pa." Alan, lips tightly pressed together, ran his hands through his graying hair and looked into his coffee mug. "Where are these beautiful grandchildren?" he replied, trying to change the subject. "They're with their father at his parents' house," Joanna replied, making it clear that Chad was a permanent part of her life, and if Alan was going to accept her, he was going to have to accept Chad as well. "I can't wait for you to see them, Pa. You will be so pleased." She took a deep breath and took a sip of her coffee. Pa, we are here to stay. We have moved back home. Alan's head shot up. He was stunned. What? He seemed to sink into the kitchen chair. I can live with Mara Joy's hate and... She paused, building her courage. And Mama's. But I can't stay away from the rest of you any longer. I can't run away anymore. They don't hate you, Alan said softly. It's just that you hurt them so badly. I understand, Pa, and I wish I could take their hurt away, Joanna continued. There is nothing I would like more than to heal all the wounds I caused. But understand this, I am here to stay, whether they forgive me or not. I won't lose you all again, not even if it means hurting them once more. Alan nodded in acknowledgement. He'd thought of JoBeth and Mara Joy, even Alan Michael. It was not going to be easy for Joanna. She didn't realize the full extent of the grief and anguish her actions had caused. How her presence back in their lives was a reminder of the pain she had inflicted on those she left behind, that her marriage and her children were a slap in the face. No, it was not going to be easy for her at all.